All right. Well, welcome to the Panther Political Science Podcast. Doc Renfro here with you. We are lucky to have with us Collin Brecher, class of 2016, political science major, now working at the American Chemistry Council. He's going to tell us a little bit about his pathway to UNI and how he got into political science and how that curriculum and educational pathway has served him in his time. So without further ado, Collin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the opportunity.
Yes, and for our viewers here in Northern Iowa in late March, it's worth noting that Collin is sitting comfortably in a hotel room in Miami, Florida at a conference, and he's lending some time to us today to talk to us. So Collin, tell us, where are you from?
So I grew up unfortunately not in Miami, Florida, although I would have loved to have taken this call from the beach. But so I grew up in Northeast Iowa, just outside of Waterloo, a little town called LaPorte City. And so that's kind of how I ended up at UNI. I wanted that kind of small community feeling, but a large enough campus that still had plenty of activities and things to do. And UNI was just kind of a natural move.
So when you were there, in high school, LaPorte City, I suppose Waterloo was the big city close by that you would go to
Yep.
for your
About 20 minutes south. Yep. So we'd make plenty of burrito runs in high school, late night burrito runs, and yeah.
Were you sort of torn between other schools on your short list, or was it just always going to be UNI?
It was always going to be UNI. I explored kind of going out of state, looking at University of Minnesota and some others, but ultimately when it came down to it, the cost of staying in state as opposed to going out of state and the affordability of UNI was kind of what kept me. And it was sort of an easy choice. It wasn't too hard.
You probably had friends or relatives that were also alum from here.
Yep. Yep. My brother, my older brother went to UNI. Plenty of people that I went to high school with that were a little older than me. Plenty of them went to UNI. I think it's just because of that. You get that still the small town feel and the small town classes, but like I said, there's still plenty of opportunity.
I always say, it's not too big, it's not too little.
Exactly.
So you get to UNI as a freshman. Are you a declared major at this point, or are you sort of like so many people kind of not knowing what you're
So I came in, I was the person that said, I'm picking my major and I'm going to stick to it all 4 years. And there's no way I'm going to deviate from that. I came in as an accounting major, as I enjoyed high school accounting and had thought, well, I did a couple of job shadows and thought, oh, this would be fun. And as I started to take a couple of business classes, I realized maybe accounting wasn't quite my fit. And I switched over to, after my freshman year, switched to economics. And I don't know if this is common or not for maybe political science minded brains, but I realized that I wasn't the best at math and numbers. And so then I'd always had a passion for politics and an interest in politics. And so my girlfriend at the time, my now wife, had enough sense to talk me into pursuing a political science degree, because that was what I was interested about, and that's what I enjoyed. But I think I struggled to figure out. Well, I just was so I was in this narrow bubble of, what am I actually going to do with a political science degree? I don't have a desire to go on and teach. But then as I thought about it more and explored the opportunities more through the department, I realized that there's a lot of career opportunities and paths to go. So then at the end of my sophomore year, I flipped over to political science, and that's all she wrote.
That's great. And you raise several good points there that's worth talking about in detail. One is that point you made about with a poli-sci degree, people often don't understand how broad that is and how many opportunities there are. So there's obvious ones, grad school, law school, and that's great, but that's not for everybody. And what people sometimes overlook is all the stuff in between. And so, I look forward to you telling us about some of that. But first, I didn't know about this wife that gave you such words of wisdom, or the soon to be wife. Is she also UNI poli-sci major?
She actually went to the University of Iowa and studied ethics and public policy.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. So there you are. Was there a particular, maybe you were taking electives, or what's the poli-sci class, if any, that in particular turned you on, or was it just a combination? Tell us about that.
I think it was a combination. I believe I'd have to go back and look at my transcript. But I think my first class was with Dr. Holmes of just Introduction to American Politics, and I really, where in some of the other classes where I really had to work to have a good comprehension of the material, just because of my previous interest and reading. I felt like, gosh, I already have a really good handle on this, and just was able to absorb so much more information because I was also enjoying the content and the material. And so that was the first one. And after that, it was like, I belong here. And the department was great about, explaining and kind of talking through some of those post options. But as I started to look through the curriculum, a lot of the curriculum was a lot more interesting to me, and things that I enjoyed to learn about, as opposed to kind of having to just grind through to feel like I was doing a good enough job to get through the curriculum and some of the other courses I was taking, just because it just didn't quite fit for what I was thinking it would.
Yeah. And see, this is another good point that, is for understandable reasons so often overlooked, because look, you come in accounting, you're dead set, because first of all, we have a great accounting program here.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, it's basically a guaranteed job and career post-graduation. But here's where it gets a little tricky. What if you don't like it?
Right.
You can go ahead and slog through and wake up at 30 in a cubicle and say, oh dear, it's too late for me now. And so I think when you said basically classes you enjoyed is key, because I tell people all the time, and it's nice to have you, because you graduated, you've been on the market a half dozen years now. And so you have some perspective that you can share for the younger folks. And I think your point about, hey, if you're enjoying something, the rest will sort of fall into place.
Exactly.
And stuff that you probably didn't even know, when you got here, you probably weren't familiar with the American Chemistry Council that you'll tell us about here in a minute. But this is my constant point. I tell people, there's so much you can do. You just have to know that these options exist first, and if you enjoy doing something, everything will fall into place. And at UNI's political science department, I think all kinds of alum will tell you the broad scope of what we offer, from the international to the local, everything in between. If you can't find something, check for a pulse.
Yep.
Because it's not for everybody, but a lot of people think this stuff is fun. I happen to think it's fun, although, like you say about the math stuff, if we do offer plenty of. If you're into that, you can do that.
Yep.
But I can tell you, when I was an undergrad student, I also would avoid anything hard math wise, like the So there you are now. You're a sophomore, and you declared your poli-sci major right about that year.
Yep. Right at the start of junior year. Yep.
Did you end up double majoring or getting any of these certificates, or were you just sort of in plain Jane general poli-sci major?
Just a plain Jane general poli-sci. By that time, I had I was just taking care of a lot of gen ed credits. And so I honestly wasn't too terribly far into the accounting or kind of econ major. I think I could probably go and get a class or two and just have an economics minor. But I was just able to use those towards just my general credits. And also, I didn't feel like it was too late to be pigeonholed into something that I didn't really enjoy doing.
Right.
And I don't think it's ever probably too late to do that. It's not knowledge lost. It's just additional knowledge that you have that you can apply to a field later, and you never know when it's going to come up and when you're going to need it. And as you alluded to, I'm at the American Chemistry Council now. And I was probably the same guy in high school and in college that in high school, certainly, that I told my high school chemistry teacher, like, when am I ever going to use this? And I use it regularly every day. And I wrote her an apology email shortly after I started to say, if you ever need anecdotal evidence, if you have no idea when something's going to be useful in your career later down the road, I'm a great example of that.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I should send my high school chemistry teacher an apology email because she's retired now. And when I was in high school, nobody was doing emails. It wasn't a thing. But oh God, I was a bad chemistry student. That was one of my worst subjects. But it was required. You sort of had this to, if you were college bound type thing.
Yep.
And she did her best with me, but you can't reach everyone.
No. No.
So there you are. Now you're proceeding in your college career, and let's say you're a senior now, and you start getting serious. Okay, I'm graduating. What am I going to do? And I'm sure everybody's parents are having the same questions to their children that are students. Okay, so what was the American Chemistry Council your first sort of thing, or tell me about how you discovered it?
Before even graduation, I had a really cool opportunity to work in the Iowa legislature as a clerk, and I was able to get, I think, 8 credit hours towards my degree for having that experience through Dr. Larimer oversaw it. And so I took that experience through in the second to last semester of my senior year. I took that, and then I actually graduated in the fall of 16. I had a one seminar that I had to complete. So I was working full time as I completed my last class. But back to my time in the legislature, that real world experience paid huge dividends later on, because I met so many people and friends that I still talk with today that I clerked with back in the 2015 session. And so that would have been actually the latter half of my junior year, was that time in the legislature, and being able to being able to get paid while earning college credit and getting that real world experience on the state house floor. I was so happy that I did it, and truly set up the opportunities for me to figure out that I really enjoyed state government and state government affairs, and I had a really great boss that gave me a lot of meaningful projects and tasks. And so that experience leading up to graduation really kind of set in stone, like, I know this is what I want to do, and that there's a big career field outside or after college, that the skills and the material I'm working on and learning at UNI is going to be valuable.
So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think, I remember you doing that. This was 2015, seems like forever ago.
Right.
Which we've all been through with the pandemic. This is pre-pandemic days,
Yep.
It's like before and after the plague days is how the memory works. And so, yeah, one of the great opportunities that Collin took advantage of is that internship program we have in poli-sci, and the opportunity to go see how the sausage is made, so to speak, at the state level, which is often, people overlook. Everybody worries about the U.S. Congress, and that's fine and important. But what people sometimes don't realize, perhaps as much as they should, is how much the state government actually affects your day-to-day, more so than in D.C. And so I'm sure that's a great experience. And, I would encourage, I'm sure you would encourage everybody who's the least bit interested to try to get involved in these sorts of internships, because I can tell you that the state senators and state reps love UNI students and love our majors coming to work for them. It's always a big help for them, the legislators, and it's a huge learning experience for our students. I don't know any student who's done that and regretted it. It's always been a positive experience.
And whether that be working a campaign for a summer and a fall, or working a legislative session as a clerk, there were endless opportunities to be able to do that. And I felt really lucky that it really cleared my career path or I guess cleared the way for the career path I knew I wanted to go down after that experience.
That's awesome. So there you are doing that work, and then like was the chemistry council the first thing that you were turned on to, or was there several things? And
Yeah, so I finished the session and I had I got on doing a part of where I'd known my boss at my legislator, I guess, for a while. I'd helped in high school put out signs for his first campaign, and so he really trusted me, and I had a really fortunate experience to be able to meet with lobbyists and constituents, and I wasn't necessarily declaring his position on policy, but was at least taking meetings if he wasn't able to be two places at once. And it was that exposure to kind of the lobby pool, and taking meetings in the rotunda at the Capitol, that I gained a lot of interest. And I've had this passion for business, and I've had this passion for politics, hence the business of what I came in with. And I thought, what a perfect way. I mean, that's just the perfect way to merge them. Merge the two. And so that is where I decided, okay, I think I really want to do government affairs work. And so I started in my last year at UNI, I worked as a government relations intern for the VGM group in Waterloo. So I was able to work part-time there while going to school, and got hired on, and I worked there for 3 years full-time after I graduated. And then life kind of happened, and my wife and I had an opportunity here in Des Moines with the American Chemistry Council opened up for me, and said, well, we'll move down to Des Moines. And now I've been at ACC for almost 3.5 years, going on 4 years. So yeah, it was that kind of cross between business and politics that really had me interested, and I feel really lucky to be able to do it every day.
Yeah. So this is a interesting trajectory. So I want to slow down and unpack it a little for the audience, because the students watching will be very interested on, sort of how how does that work? So
Yep.
You're interning, you're networking, and you're learning about how the legislative process works and how lobbying works. And of course, lobbying has often a negative connotation, but a different word for that might be expertise. John Boehner has a hilarious, despite whether you like John Boehner or you don't like John Boehner, his memoir that came out is one of the funniest, I think, memoirs. And he has this whole bit on lobbyists. He's a lobbyist now. And he says when he was in state government in Ohio, you learn so much from lobbyists, because these are the people that are paid to actually know stuff that will then tell the legislator about it, is, essentially what it is. Now, of course, that can be for good or for bad, that's a whole different thing. But the point is, the average citizen is not, nor do they want to be, an expert in all of these different things. And the legislator, him or herself, can't be an expert in everything. Hence, lobbyists that are paid to tell you, okay, here's how it works, right? And here's why X, Y, Z. So, but I want to step back and say, how did you get the job with VGM initially? Was that through simple networking, or did you go online and apply? Tell us about it.
So back then, they didn't have a formal posting. It was a total case of it's not necessarily always what you know, but it's who you know. And I had a close family friend that I was living with when I was working in the legislature was friends with an exec at VGM, and he shared my resume and my interest, and they have a government affairs team there. And so it was, a lot of it, whether it be, I guess just about any job, sometimes it can just kind of come down to pure luck. And I wouldn't have thought to have looked at VGM if it wasn't for my family friend, because I just didn't know. And so it was totally just kind of a right place, right time. And, my experience at the Capitol and interest in politics helped land me the internship. I don't think I was competing against anybody, because it wasn't necessarily an open posted position, which helped, I suppose. But I'd like to think that after being there for a few years, I must have been doing something right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the type of thing I think our viewers would be interested in, So if I have a student that's asking me, maybe they're interested in the same general interest that you have, and so far as business and politics and policies, I'll have to send them your way for the expert advice on that. It couldn't hurt. See, this is
Please do.
why you and I, not too big, so that you don't get lost, and not too small, so that you don't know anybody. And see, this is how networking can work.
Yep, exactly. And to the point you were making earlier about that I always like to highlight is and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you don't have to be particularly interested in a business field, or if you care most about campaign finance reform or the environment, or whatever an issue that you really care about might be, chances are there's either a company or a trade association like I work for, or an environmental group that works on these issues, on all sides of issues. And so you can find things that you have a passion for that you can turn into a career. And there's an association for just about everything.
Yeah.
Mine just happens to be the business of chemistry. But like I said, there's ample opportunities to work for trade associations or groups, to kind of have that, I guess, share that interest, or share an interest that you have. There's lots of opportunity to be able to pursue that and to make it into a career.
Absolutely. I wish there was like a website that, like if you wanted to work for the federal government, they have usajobs.com. Everything in the whole federal government virtually is listed on that and searchable by keywords.
Yep.
Is there there's nothing like that for
I know of one group that we belong to. It's a DC group called the Public Affairs Council, and they have a job board that I'm not. I think they may post internships on there, but you will see a lot of major companies, Fortune 500s, trade associations, NGOs that are posting jobs on that job board. I don't know if they very well might have internships on there as well, but that's a great job board that I know of that we post our jobs on there regularly.
Yeah. Okay. Can you say that name again?
Yep. The Public Affairs Council.
Public Affairs Council. So you go to the Public Affairs Council, maybe that will help you. Again, the trick to all of this is finding the opportunities that you didn't know were out there.
Exactly.
And so these sorts of resources are absolutely key. I didn't know that. So now everybody's learning something.
Yep. Super.
Right. So you're at VGM, then you get sort of this offer to the American Chemistry Council in Des Moines, which is a great city. I always enjoy my visits there. Lot to do. It's fun, great for young couples, anyone really. It's just a pleasant city to be in.
Yep.
And so tell us now about American Chemistry Council, or ACC for short. A little bit, just a little, how you got in. You already alluded to, but maybe a little bit more on that. And then, what do you do for them?
Yeah. So I just kind of got lucky and ran across the job posting on LinkedIn, and there's even everybody looks to DC. That's the first place I feel like everybody looks. Yeah. But there are state affiliates, or for us, we're a regional office of the American Chemistry Council. So we're headquartered in DC, and we have a few hundred people in DC, and then we have 5 regional offices throughout the country. And there's 2 of us in the Midwest office that cover our states. And so I really didn't have any sort of connection to ACC before, but so I'll kind of tell you about my role. So I'm a political mobilization manager, which we are the grassroots advocacy arm of ACC, and just helping connect elected officials with our member companies to offer site tours and kind of relationship building, so they have a good understanding of the impact that chemistry has in their district, the jobs, all the sustainability efforts, and help tell that story. And then, because I'm in a regional office, I also support our senior director for state affairs. So he's our kind of chief lobbyist in the region that's responsible for covering state policy, bill tracking, and sort of triaging issues that come up from state legislatures across the Midwest. And so I do a little bit of a support role and cover a couple issues, but chief among them is building codes. So chemistry, in foam and spray foam insulation and a number of other products are all around us, and chemistry is all around us, and that's one of them. And so I found out that not a whole lot of people care about building codes except the people that care about building codes, but it's just one of the many things that you don't even realize impacts your daily life that revolves around chemistry. And so that's kind of, I really enjoy that advocacy piece, and, I get to travel to fun places throughout the region and conferences to be able to talk to our member companies and hear what their priorities are and share with them the resource that we have for them.
That's great. So, and this brings me back to my point about expertise. So, you're so much is around you. So just take the insulation that's in my attic, right?
Yep.
I don't know anything about that, except I know I'm supposed to have it because it's good for energy use, for example, and it'll keep me a little bit warmer during wintertime and a little bit cooler during summertime. But somebody has to think about these things and then tell the people that write policies about it, because I'm not going to be an expert in it. And I assure you that most likely my elected officials are not going to be experts in it. And so this is where you come in to explain and advocate sorts of things. So that's very interesting.
And to kind of your point of, I guess to the further point of, our member companies are manufacturing chemistries that are crucial for solar panels and some electric vehicles and semiconductor and chip computer chip production. The plastics that we interact with every single day, our member companies are manufacturing. And so fortunately, I don't have to be an expert, and my boss and boss's boss don't have to be an expert in everything. We've got PhD chemists that work for ACC that really know the science. Our job is just to help kind of connect those dots and convey it in a way that a part-time legislator is going to be able to absorb and understand. Because, like you said, they have to be a jack of all trades and a master of none when it comes to a wide range of issues. My time at VGM, it was healthcare, and a very small subset of healthcare that we had to be experts on and help explain and educate them on issues that were important to our membership. And they heavily rely on that. If we move to the federal level, it's the same thing for staff and the member of Congress to be able to have that information, to know how policy is going to impact their district or their state. And that's the role we play. And as I said earlier, there's an infinite number of areas that you can go into to play that role.
Oh, that's great. So you're enjoying all of that, living in Des Moines, right? And you get to go to conferences in Miami, Florida, and others. How much traveling do you do? How does
it sort of kind of ebbs and flows. It typically matches up with the congressional recess calendar if Congress is back in their home districts. But sometimes it can be 50-60% of the month, and then there might be a stretch where I'm at home for 3 or 4 straight weeks.
And then the wife is saying, when are you going to the conference next?
Yeah, there's fortunately, I have a very understanding and supportive wife, and I always laugh. And like for the August recess, when Congress is back from the end of July through the whole month of August into September, there's often times where my team and I are out of town for 3 or 4 days of the week. And, she's a single dog mom at home when I'm on the road. So having an understanding spouse is very helpful, and she has her career too and understands the demands. So feel very fortunate there.
Indeed. All right. So looking back then, as your long time ago when you were an undergraduate student, you and I, did you have any classes that you would say were particularly beneficial for the trajectory that you went on? I mean, of course, you talked about Dr. Larimer supervising your internship, but subject matter classes that you felt might be particularly useful for, listeners to the show that are thinking about their registration.
Yeah. So, I mean, in my career field, in my job, it's extremely important to be able to communicate clearly, and to communicate complex things in a clear way. And so, for one, I still have a couple of the books from the class, but I took political communication with Dr. Holmes, and that was one that it was really interesting to kind of break down the way that, whether it be presidential speeches or kind of how to captivate and capture an audience and break ideas down into smaller bite-sized pieces that are easier to absorb. That was one. And I do feel, while I wouldn't trade the internship time in for the world, that was also a little bit of coursework that I didn't get to have. But what I was able to do was supplement, because I think I'm right in saying that it's 8 hours max that you can do the political internship. So I had to remain a full-time student. I had to come up with an extra credit hour or two of an independent study, and I had cared about kind of the polarization of our political system. And Dr. Holmes, again, I promise I took other classes besides with Dr. Holmes, but he led my independent study where we kind of worked through a subject area that I wanted to do some further research into, and I picked polarization. And there's still two of the books that he wanted me to read for that I frequently go back and flip through to be able to do that. So it was, and just that small independent study, truly, I still think about that, and it still has an impact on me, even as an independent study, because it was something that I was particularly interested in and was able to kind of go down the rabbit hole into.
That's great. I mean, I tell you, I'm sure Professor Holmes would be very happy to hear that. I know as a professor, there's nothing better than having a student say a particular book or two that you happen to assign.
Yep.
It's something that even these years later you look back on fondly. That's great.
I still have the President's Words as one of the books, and I still have it on the shelf behind me at my office, and
It's awesome.
that made the library.
It's awesome. All right, well, Collin, let's do this part now, where I always like to say, especially hindsight being 2020, and you've been out of UNI for 6 years. So you have some experience and some maturity, that maybe you didn't have as a sophomore. You know what I'm saying? You've been in
As
the
a young buck, sure.
private sector, and what I think this is a really important part, is where I'd like to ask you, looking back, what advice would you have for the younger students? Advice in the affirmative sense of things to do, or advice in the negative sense, things to not do. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I would say, and I kind of alluded to it at the beginning of our chat, of just don't feel like you have to pigeonhole yourself into a certain area and that you're having to force yourself to like the content. And that could be applicable to whether it be your studies at UNI or even your career choice. Especially at the beginning of your career, you don't have to be stuck in a certain area if you don't particularly care for it, or if you learn that maybe you like something else better. And so, whether it be my case of starting as an accounting major and going over to ending up in political science, you've got a lot more time than I think you might think, or it might feel. 4 years, 4.5. I'd say I took half a victory lap with needing my extra semester for my one class. But it goes by really quickly. But as you're going through it, you have more time than you realize, and explore courses that you may have an interest in, you may not, and don't feel like you have to stay stuck on a single track. And that was where I found my groove in the political science department, and where I really flourished and thrived. School wasn't as much of a grind. It certainly wasn't an easy program, but when it's something that you enjoy and you want to learn about, it's a lot easier to crank through a book or a reading assignment, or actually get ahead on a paper and not be forced to do it last minute because you're putting it off. But when it's something that you enjoy, all of that is just much easier to dedicate yourself to, and you're going to have a much higher degree of success and an interest and an enjoyable, I would say I had a much more enjoyable experience once I was in a program that I knew I really enjoyed.
Great to hear. I think those are some fine and wise words we can leave it on. Now, my instruction for you, Collin, as a doctor, is to take a break, go back to the conference, but you need to get one of those drinks with an umbrella in it.
Oh,
Okay?
I could, if I can take care of that. I've got,
anybody
if I
asks you
peek
about
around
it,
the corner
If
of the
anybody asks you
window.
about it, you say, quiet down. Dr. Renfro told me to do this. Okay. Thank you.
I'll be sure my dinner with my boss tonight. I'll be sure and get a nice umbrella drink and maybe some fruit.
There you go. So thanks again for being with us, Collin. We appreciate your time and your advice and your experiences, and we'll stay in touch. All right.
Certainly, if there's ever a student that has an interest in the career field, or I'm happy to connect with anybody that's thinking about it. But thank you so much for the chance, and it was great to catch up with you.
You bet. All right. We'll sign off.